Everyone remembers the tractors. Ask any American farmer about the machines that changed their lives, and they'll tell you about the big iron that broke the soil, the workhorses that pulled the plows, the diesel monsters that made headlines and broke records. But what if I told you that the machine that truly transformed American agriculture wasn't a tractor at all? What if the real revolution happened not in the spring planting season, but during those critical weeks of autumn harvest? What if I told you that a relatively modest, unassuming green machine introduced in the aftermath of World War II became the single most important harvester in American farming history? We're not talking about the biggest. We're not talking about the most powerful. We're talking about the one that actually changed everything. The one that took American farming from the age of backbreaking labor into the modern era. The one that small farmers could actually afford, that they could actually operate, that actually worked when they needed it most. Here's the kicker. While everyone was watching the tractor wars, John Deere quietly introduced a self-propelled combine that would redefine what harvest time meant for millions of American families. This is the story of the Model 55, the best-selling harvester in history, and the machine that brought the future to farms from Iowa to Idaho. And that's where the story begins. To understand why the Model 55 mattered so much, you have to understand what American farming looked like in the years immediately following World War II. It was 1946. The war had ended. Boys were coming home from Europe and the Pacific, ready to take over their family farms or start new ones on land they'd dreamed about during cold nights in foxholes and on troop ships. America was hungry. The world was hungry. And American farmers were being asked to feed them all. But farming in 1946 still looked remarkably similar to farming in 1926, or even 1896 in some places. Sure, tractors had replaced horses on many farms, but harvest time? That was still a brutal, labor-intensive affair that required hiring crews, coordinating schedules, and praying the weather held long enough to get the crop in before it spoiled in the field. The combines that existed were massive, expensive pull-type machines that required a separate tractor to move them, demanded specialized knowledge to operate, and cost more than most small farmers could ever afford. These machines belonged to custom harvesters or large corporate farms. The average American farmer with 160 acres of wheat or 200 acres of oats. He was still cutting with a binder, shocking the grain by hand, hauling it to a stationary threshing machine, and employing a crew of neighbors and hired men to get the job done. It was the same process his grandfather had used. It was exhausting, expensive, and risky. A sudden storm could destroy a month's income in an hour. A delay could mean the difference between a profitable year and financial disaster. John Deere understood this problem better than anyone. The company had been building agricultural equipment since 1837, when John Deere himself had hammered out that first self-scouring steel plow in his blacksmith shop in Grand Detour, Illinois. By the 1940s, the company had become synonymous with quality, durability, and innovation in American farming. But they'd also become known for understanding what farmers actually needed, not just what engineers thought they should have. The men in Moline, Illinois, where John Deere had moved their headquarters, knew that the future of harvesting wasn't just about bigger machines for bigger farms. It was about bringing mechanized harvesting to every farm in America. They knew that the farmer who owned a section, 640 acres, could afford the big equipment. But what about the farmer working a quarter section? What about the family trying to make it on 80 acres of good bottom land? Those farmers needed a combine they could afford, operate themselves, and maintain without a team of specialized mechanics. They needed a revolution, not an evolution. And in 1946, John Deere gave it to them. The Model 55 wasn't John Deere's first attempt at a combine harvester. The company had been experimenting with harvesting equipment for years, watching competitors, learning from mistakes, and waiting for the right moment to make their move. But the 55 was different from anything that had come before. It was John Deere's first self-propelled combine, meaning it didn't need a separate tractor to move it through the field. That alone was revolutionary for small farmers who might only own one tractor and couldn't afford to tie it up pulling a combine for weeks during harvest. But the real innovation, the thing that set the 55 apart from every other combine on the market, was where they put the operator. Most combines of that era, whether pull-type or self-propelled, positioned the operator down low, near the engine, surrounded by noise and heat and dust. It was miserable. You couldn't see what you were doing half the time. The engine roar would leave your ears ringing for days. The heat radiating from the motor would cook you alive on a hot August afternoon, and the dust got into everything. Your lungs, your eyes, your clothes. Operating a combine in 1946 was only slightly preferable to working in a coal mine. But the engineers at John Deere, men whose names have largely been lost to history but whose work changed millions of lives, had a different vision. What if you put the operator station at the top and center of the machine? What if you gave him a clear view of the cutting header, the crop flow, and the field ahead? What if you positioned the grain tank and the engine behind the operator station, using their weight for better balance and creating a barrier between the operator and all that noise and heat? It sounds simple now. It sounds obvious. But in 1946, it was revolutionary. When farmers first climbed up into that elevated operator station on the Model 55, it changed everything. Suddenly they could see, they could breathe, they could hear themselves think. The grain tank, with its capacity of 45 bushels, sat directly behind the operator, creating perfect weight distribution that helped the machine stay level, even on sloped ground. The engine, a 6-cylinder Hercules QXD 3-gasoline engine producing 45 horsepower, was positioned behind the grain tank, its noise and heat directed away from the operator. It was quieter. It was cooler. It was, in the words of one Iowa farmer who bought a 55 in 1947, like going from driving a Model T to flying an airplane. You were up where you could see everything, and the machine just did what you told it to do. But that was only the beginning. The Model 55 wasn't just about operator comfort, though that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. It was about making a combine that worked for the farms that actually existed in America, not the farms that only existed in corporate boardrooms and agricultural college textbooks. The 55 was designed for small to medium-sized farms, the backbone of American agriculture. It had a 30-inch cylinder for threshing, which was the perfect size for handling wheat, oats, barley, rye, and other small grains that dominated Midwest farming. It wasn't the biggest cylinder on the market. It wasn't trying to be. It was sized for efficiency on farms where you might be harvesting 40 acres of wheat, then moving to 60 acres of oats, then finishing with 30 acres of barley. You didn't need a massive machine that could swallow 20-foot swaths. You needed something maneuverable, reliable, and efficient. The ground speed control was selective, meaning the operator could adjust his travel speed based on crop conditions and density. You could crawl along at 2 or 3 miles per hour through a heavy stand of wheat that was yielding 40 bushels per acre, giving the machine time to properly thresh and separate every kernel. Or you could open it up and travel at 9.5 miles per hour when moving between fields or when you hit a thin spot in the crop. That kind of flexibility was unheard of in most combines of the era. You ran at whatever speed the machine was geared for, and you made it work. The tires were 9 by 24 inches, standard pneumatic rubber that replaced the steel wheels, or narrow, hard rubber tires that older combines used. This mattered more than you might think. Those rubber tires provided traction without tearing up the field. They gave you a smoother ride, which reduced fatigue during those long harvest days that started before sunrise and didn't end until you couldn't see anymore. They let you move the machine on roads between farms without tearing up the pavement or getting stuck in soft shoulders. In wet conditions, when you absolutely had to keep harvesting because the forecast called for a week of rain starting tomorrow, those tires could mean the difference between finishing and watching your crop rot in the field. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. The Model 55 wasn't just mechanically sound, it was affordable. The exact price varied by dealer and region, but a new Model 55 in 1947 cost roughly the same as a good used car or a year's worth of hired labor during 1947 harvest. For a small farmer who'd been spending hundreds of dollars every year to hire a threshing crew, the math was simple. Buy a 55, and after 2 or 3 harvests, the machine had paid for itself. After that, every harvest was putting money in the bank instead of paying someone else's wages. And because it was self-propelled, you didn't need that second tractor sitting idle 11 months out of the year just so you'd have something to pull a combine with in August. The dimensions tell their own story about what this machine was designed to do. At approximately 21 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 11 feet high, the 55 was compact enough to navigate country roads, fit through standard farm gates, and maneuver around obstacles in irregular fields. At around 8,000 pounds, it was heavy enough to be stable and solid, but light enough that you weren't going to compact the soil and damage future crops. You could park it in a standard barn. You could work on it in a normal machine shed. You didn't need specialized equipment just to maintain your combine. This was a machine designed by people who understood that farmers needed equipment that fit into their existing operations, not equipment that required building a new infrastructure just to accommodate it. The reliability and efficiency that John Deere built into the Model 55 became legendary. These machines didn't just work, they kept working. Farmers who bought 55s in 1946 were still using them 20 years later, and in some cases, 30 or 40 years later. You'd see them in fields across Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, still painted in that distinctive John Deere green and yellow, still cutting wheat and oats like they were brand new. The secret wasn't some miracle of engineering. It was old-fashioned quality construction combined with smart design. The moving parts were accessible. The maintenance points were clearly marked. The machine was designed so that a farmer with basic mechanical knowledge and a normal set of tools could handle 90% of the maintenance and repairs himself. Sure, there were common issues. The cooling system could be temperamental, especially if you let dust accumulate around the radiator. On a hot July day, pushing through heavy dry wheat that kicked up clouds of chaff and dust with every pass, that radiator could clog up faster than you'd believe. But the solution was simple. Stop every few hours, blow out the radiator with compressed air, or even just a leaf blower, and keep moving. The moving parts experienced wear, as moving parts do. Belts needed replacing, bearings needed greasing, chains needed adjusting. But none of that was mysterious or complicated. You could do it yourself in your own shop, with parts you could order from any John Deere dealer in America and have delivered within days. That parts availability was crucial to the Model 55's success and longevity. John Deere didn't just sell you a machine and wish you luck. They built a support network that meant you were never more than a phone call and a short drive from getting whatever you needed. Small-town dealers across the Midwest stocked 55 parts like they were gold, because in harvest season, they might as well be. A farmer whose combine was down in the middle of harvest would pay almost anything to get back in the field. John Deere understood that the best way to build customer loyalty wasn't through advertising or gimmicks. It was through making sure that when your machine broke, you could fix it quickly and get back to work. The dealers who understood this, who kept their parts inventory stocked and their service department trained, built businesses that lasted generations. Farmers praised the ease of repair with an almost religious fervor. In coffee shops and grain elevators across the Midwest, you'd hear stories about fixing a 55 with nothing but a wrench, some baling wire, and determination. Some of these stories were probably exaggerated, as farmer stories tend to be, but the core truth was undeniable. Went wrong with a Model 55, you could usually figure out what it was, find the part, or make a temporary fix, and get back to harvesting. Compare that to some of the European combines that started appearing in the 1950s, machines that required specialized diagnostic equipment and factory-trained mechanics to service. Those might have been more sophisticated, but sophistication doesn't help you when you're 3 days from finishing harvest and the nearest authorized service center is 200 miles away. The golden age of the Model 55 stretched from its introduction in 1946 through the mid to late 1950s. These were boom years for American agriculture. The post-war economy was strong, crop prices were stable and often good. Land values were rising but still reasonable enough that young farmers could get started. And mechanization was finally reaching the small and medium-sized farms that made up the vast majority of American agriculture. The Model 55 rode that wave perfectly. It became the combine that every farmer either owned or wanted to own. If you were farming 160 to 320 acres of grain, the 55 was your machine. It was strong enough to handle your acreage in a reasonable amount of time. It was gentle enough not to damage the grain. It was reliable enough that you could count on it year after year. In real-world conditions across the American heartland, the Model 55 proved itself again and again. In the wheat fields of Kansas, where a farmer might have 200 acres of golden grain ripening under a blazing sun, the 55 could cut 10 to 15 acres per day, depending on yields and conditions. That might not sound impressive by modern standards, when combines can harvest that much in an hour. But in 1950, when your alternative was hiring a crew of 6 men and spending 2 weeks with binders and a threshing machine, the ability to harvest your entire crop yourself in 2 weeks was nothing short of miraculous. The machine was strong enough to pull a house off its foundation, or at least that's how farmers describe the pulling power when you engage the drive system. The 45 horsepower from that Hercules engine might not sound like much, but it was delivered through a carefully designed gear system that gave you torque where you needed it. When you dropped that header into a heavy stand of oats that was lying down from a storm, and the machine just kept pulling, kept cutting, kept feeding grain into the cylinder without bogging down or stalling, that's when you understood what John Deere had built. This wasn't a machine that required perfect conditions. This was a machine that worked in the real world, where crops weren't always standing straight, where fields weren't always level, where you sometimes had to keep harvesting even when the dew was still heavy in the morning because the forecast said rain was coming. The feel of operating a Model 55 became part of the cultural memory of a generation of American farmers. You'd climb up that ladder in the pre-dawn darkness, still half asleep, with your thermos of coffee and your lunch pail. You'd settle into that operator's station high above the ground and fire up that 6-cylinder Hercules. The engine would cough once or twice, then settle into that steady, reliable rumble that you could feel in your chest. You'd engage the header, lower it into position, and ease forward into the standing grain. The whole machine would shudder slightly as the reel started turning, as the sickle bar began its back-and-forth cutting motion, as the first stalks of wheat or oats fed into the gathering chain and up into the cylinder. Then came the sound. That particular thrumming, drumming, singing sound of grain being threshed, the cylinder spinning at just the right speed to separate the kernels from the straw without cracking them. You'd watch the straw walkers at the back of the machine, see the clean straw being kicked out in neat rows, perfect for baling later. You'd feel the machine rock slightly as the grain tank started filling, adding weight that actually helped stability. Every 15 or 20 minutes, depending on yields, you'd pull alongside your truck or wagon, extend the unloading auger, and watch that beautiful stream of clean, threshed grain pour into the bin. On a good day in good wheat, you could fill that 45-bushel tank 6 or 7 times an hour. Do the math, and that's nearly 300 bushels a day, enough to make a real living on a family farm. The nostalgia that later generations felt for the Model 55 wasn't just about the machine itself. It was about what the machine represented. For farmers who came of age in the 1940s and 50s, the 55 was the machine that proved they could make it on their own. They didn't need to be part of a corporate farming operation. They didn't need to rely on custom harvesters or hired crews. They could be independent, self-reliant, masters of their own fate. The 55 gave them that independence. It gave them dignity. It gave them control over their own harvest, which meant control over their own economic destiny. When old farmers talk about the good old days, they're not usually talking about how easy everything was. They're remembering when hard work and a reliable machine were enough to make a decent living. The Model 55 was that reliable machine. But nothing in agricultural machinery lasts forever. And by the late 1950s, the world was changing. The Model 55 had been revolutionary in 1946, but 13 years is a lifetime in agricultural technology. Competitors were introducing bigger machines with more powerful engines, wider cutting headers, and larger grain tanks. The economics of farming were changing too. Farms were getting larger as successful farmers bought out their neighbors. The emphasis shifted from having a machine that could handle 160 acres to needing one that could handle 640 acres or more. The 45 horsepower Hercules engine that had been perfectly adequate in 1946 seemed underpowered next to the new 60 and 80 horsepower combines hitting the market. John Deere responded by introducing new models, larger and more powerful machines that could handle the demands of increasingly large-scale agriculture. The 55 remained in production and remained popular, but it was no longer the cutting edge. It had become the reliable workhorse, the machine you bought used if you were just starting out or if you had a smaller farm. There was no shame in that. The 55 had done its job. It had brought mechanized harvesting to American agriculture. It had proved that small farmers could compete in the modern world. But the writing was on the wall. By the early 1960s, production of the Model 55 was winding down. John Deere was focusing on newer models, and farmers who needed to replace their combines were increasingly looking at machines with 60-inch cylinders instead of 30-inch ones, with grain tanks that held 90 or 120 bushels instead of 45. The era of the small, self-propelled combine was ending, replaced by the era of the medium and large combines that dominate farming today. It was a bittersweet transition. Progress is necessary, and the newer machines were objectively better in almost every measurable way. But something was lost too. The newer machines required more investment, more maintenance, more expertise. They pushed farming further toward being an industrial operation, rather than a family enterprise. The Model 55 had been the last machine that truly belonged to the small family farmer. You could understand it completely, from the engine to the header, without needing an engineering degree. You could afford it on the profits from a modest operation without mortgaging your future. When it broke, you could fix it yourself in your own shed with tools you already owned. It had been sized for the America that actually existed, not the America that agricultural economists said should exist. As the 55 faded from production lines, so too did a certain vision of what American farming could be. The men who had built their lives around machines like this watched the transition with mixed feelings, proud of progress, but mourning what was being left behind. They knew that when the last Model 55 rolled out of the factory, an era was ending that would never quite come again. Yet, even as production ended, the Model 55's influence continued. The design innovations that John Deere had introduced with the 55 became standard across the industry. That elevated operator station with improved visibility? Every modern combine uses that basic layout. The idea of positioning the engine and grain tank for better balance and quieter operation? That became industry standard. The focus on making machines that farmers could maintain and repair themselves with readily available parts? That became a key selling point for agricultural equipment manufacturers who wanted to build long-term customer loyalty. The Model 55 hadn't just been a successful product. It had been a template for what a combine harvester should be. In the decades that followed, as agriculture continued its relentless march toward bigger machines and larger operations, the Model 55 took on a new role. It became a symbol. It became a collector's item. It became a reminder of a particular moment in American history when small farmers were transitioning from the 19th century to the 20th, when mechanization was bringing opportunity rather than displacement, when a family with determination and a good combine could build a future on their own land. Classic farm machinery, shows across the Midwest, featured restored Model 55s, polished and painted until they gleamed like new. Collectors traded them, restored them, and displayed them with pride. Agricultural museums gave them places of honor, recognizing their historical significance. Restoration projects became labors of love, with enthusiasts spending hundreds of hours tracking down original parts, matching paint colors exactly, and bringing these machines back to showroom condition. Some collectors even kept their 55s in working order, firing them up once a year to cut a small field of wheat or oats. Keeping the tradition alive, the distinctive green and yellow paint scheme became instantly recognizable at county fairs and agricultural heritage events, drawing crowds of admirers who wanted to see the machine that had changed their fathers' and grandfathers' lives. These weren't just old pieces of equipment gathering dust in barns anymore. They were treasured artifacts of agricultural history, preserved for future generations who needed to understand where their food came from and what it took to produce it. The legacy of the Model 55 extends far beyond the machines themselves. It represents John Deere's understanding that innovation isn't always about building the biggest or the most powerful. Sometimes innovation means building what people actually need, making it reliable, making it affordable, and supporting it so well that it becomes indispensable. The 55 was the best-selling harvester in history, not because it was the most technologically advanced, though its design innovations were significant. It was the best-selling harvester because it solved the right problem at the right time for the right people. It gave small and medium-sized American farmers the tool they needed to compete in the modern agricultural economy. It gave them independence, efficiency, and reliability. It gave them a future. Today, more than 75 years after the first Model 55 rolled off the assembly line, its impact is still visible across American agriculture. The small family farms that survived and thrived in the 1950s and 60s, many of them did so because they had a Model 55 that let them harvest efficiently without breaking the bank. Some of those farms are still operating today, now in the hands of the third or fourth generation. The combines they use now are computerized marvels that can harvest more grain in a day than a Model 55 could harvest in a month. But the principles remain the same. You need a machine you can count on. You need equipment that fits your operation. You need to be able to maintain and repair what you own. Those lessons, learned from the Model 55 era, still guide smart farmers today. The Model 55 also influenced how John Deere approached every product they developed afterward. The company learned that building a great machine was only half the battle. The other half was supporting it. maintaining parts availability, training dealers, and standing behind the product for decades after the sale. That commitment to support became part of John Deere's identity and helped build the brand loyalty that the company enjoys today. When a farmer decides to buy John Deere, they're not just buying because of what the machine can do today. They're buying because they trust that John Deere will be there tomorrow when something breaks, and next year when they need parts, and 10 years from now when they need advice on whether to repair or replace. That trust was built, in large part, by the Model 55 and the way John Deere supported it. The influence of the 55 on later technology was profound. Every combine that John Deere built after the 55 incorporated and expanded on its basic design philosophy. The operator station kept getting better, with improved visibility, ergonomic controls, and eventually air conditioning and stereo systems. But the fundamental idea that the operator should be elevated, should have a clear view, and should be isolated from noise and heat, that came from the 55. The focus on balance and weight distribution, that became increasingly sophisticated, but the 55 proved the concept. The commitment to making machines that farmers could work on themselves, that evolved into modular designs and better diagnostic tools, but the core principle remained unchanged. Fan communities dedicated to classic John Deere equipment consider the Model 55 to be one of the most important machines the company ever built. Online forums are filled with restoration projects, maintenance tips, and stories from people whose grandfathers or great-grandfathers farmed with 55s. Collectors pay surprising amounts for machines in good condition, and completely restored examples can command prices that approach or even exceed what they cost new once you adjust for inflation. This isn't just nostalgia, though nostalgia certainly plays a role. It's recognition that the Model 55 represents something important about American agriculture, American ingenuity, and American values of independence and self-reliance. It may be gone from active service on most farms, but the Model 55 never truly died. It lives on in museums and collections. It lives on in the design of every modern combine harvester. It lives on in the memories of the generation of farmers who used them, and in the stories they told their children and grandchildren about what harvest time was like when you had a machine you could trust, a crop you'd worked all year to grow, and the satisfaction of bringing it home yourself. It lives on every time a farmer chooses John Deere because they remember that their grandfather had a 55 and it never let him down. It lives on in the fundamental principles of agricultural equipment design that it established and that we still follow today. The Model 55 wasn't just the best-selling harvester in history. It was the harvester that made history. It was the machine that brought mechanized agriculture to the American heartland. It was the tool that gave a generation of farmers independence and prosperity. It was proof that you don't have to be the biggest or the flashiest to be the best. Sometimes you just have to understand what people need, build it right, and stand behind it. John Deere did that with the Model 55, and in doing so, they changed American agriculture forever. Have you ever seen a Model 55 in person? Maybe at a farm show or in your grandfather's barn? Do you remember stories about harvest time in the 1950s and 60s, when these green and yellow machines were cutting grain across the Midwest? What's your favorite memory of classic farm equipment, or the story you heard growing up about how farming used to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the machine that changed American agriculture, subscribe for more forgotten legends and untold stories from the heartland that shaped our world.